take up more time, we'll come back to you on that. I'd like to introduce my next speaker, Matthew Marsden, Managing Director for Advisory EMEA for JLL Technologies. The session plays off of a presentation he made a couple of years ago. It's Getting Smart Wrong, another 5 things I learned this year. So Dr. Matthew Marsden is MD for Advisory and EMEA at JLL Technologies. He works at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and the built environment. Having founded WSP Smart Places practice and grown Accenture's offering in this field, Matthew has led a €100 million business across a range of asset types and geographies. He was named as the Royal Academy of Engineering's Young Engineer of the Year for 2022 for his contributions to the smart building industry. Matthew, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Back at you. I'm not embarrassing at all. Afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yeah, as Bob was saying, this is a kind of follow-up presentation to one I did a couple of years back, where I kind of went to a bunch of smart buildings conferences and was fed up with listening to these really airbrushed stories of people's projects, and me kind of think, well, is it just me? Am I rubbish? Like, why do things keep going wrong? And so, it was sort of, bit the bullet, did one on all the times that I'd messed up. And people were really nice about it, so I thought that I should probably do another one, because I think things have moved on quite a lot since I did that one. Is that one working? Oh, yes. So it's safe to say that in this presentation, everybody's modesty has been protected, and I will not tell you regardless of how many drinks you buy me. To sort of say, I think that technology, it seems to be okay just to make stuff up and be like, yeah, it's in the product roadmap, despite the fact that you've bought something and somebody told you that you had an outcome, is part of the problem why we're seeing the sorts of things that we are across the industry at the minute. And where this presentation is different from the first one I gave is that it's a lot less now about innovation, so less stuff blew up. The industry has really grown up, and we've found ways to get things done and to get technology into our buildings. And I'd say a lot of it is actually preoccupied with how we shoehorn it into the corporate context of clients that have big portfolios or estates that they want to make some sort of difference to, and they think technology is the answer. So today, I wanted to share with you 5 stories and kind of what I learned from them, which I hope are helpful. The first one is kind of called That's Not How I've Ever Done It. And I was working with a client whose job it was to deliver a smart skyscraper, and it was a very important bit of kind of functionality that they were going to have. But he was, I'd say, a industry figure and had perhaps had done things a certain way for his entire career, and along came me and the team and said, well, there's this new technology thing, and it means that we have to change processes to a whole sort of point, and it didn't work very well. And I think there were probably 3 factors that went against us. The first one is to do with how value in technology was defined. The second was probably around the skills, and the third one we'll come to. So to start with, I think where the sort of construction industry struggles is that the budget that is given for a project defines the outcome. And when you have to start chopping stuff in order to make sure that your building is delivered on budget, they call it value engineering, or as I prefer to name it, value extraction, as they look for different ways to cut corners and not give you the stuff that you were after in the first place. Whereas with technology, it doesn't really work like that. Because of its multiplier effect, you start with your intended outcomes, you define the budget and work out whether or not to fund that because it makes sense for the return that you get back for it, and they call that a business case. And this, I think, was a real struggle for this client in particular, because that's just not how the capital allocation worked. It was a sort of constant fight. Well, how will I know that I get this thing from there? And do I need to do proof of concepts? It's like saying, well, no, I think the technology is now mature to a point. It's like saying, well, can I do a POC on Outlook? It's like, no, we know that email works. The next one, I think, was probably just the fundamentals in the way that construction people and software people work. So at the top is a picture of the Royal Institute of British Architects Plan of Work, which is a framework that they use to help people along the construction process. Whereas at the bottom, in sort of software land, we often use something called Agile, which basically means we can change direction, we can learn stuff along the way, we can test it out on people, and be really sort of nimble when it comes to changing stuff. But in buildings, you have to do things in a certain order because it doesn't make sense to put the windows in before you've installed the foundations. And normally a project will come along, it's going to be this great thing, then we get into the sort of details here in technical design, which is just before construction, that says, we should probably make this a smart building. And at that point, we've got to try and unpick everything that they've already done to find a way to shoehorn the technology in, when in fact, it would probably make a lot more sense if we were involved in the preparation and the brief of the building, so that we could say, well, if you do X, Y, Z, you will save money in these other places, it will deliver this outcome, rather than well, this is a best case scenario, which will then be value extracted out later. And where I think we sometimes don't speak the same language with each other is during the construction process, and all of the nervousness that the building folks had about not knowing the order in which we're going to deliver our software actually becomes a superpower, because if they've got a delay on something, it means that we can then divert the team who's building the app or the platform or whatever it is out onto something else that perhaps isn't as time critical, and you can use it to your advantage to get stuff done. And then if you were probably doing this process properly, you would keep somebody from the tech side round afterwards, because I often say for projects, they're completed, they claim to be the smartest thing ever, the Starship Enterprise has landed, and nobody knows how to fly the thing. Never mind then to work the kinks out afterwards, which with a couple of sprints, you might be able to get the building singing and purring perfectly to how you want it. So that's one that I think we also struggled with on that. And then the last one is probably to do with skills. And if you're familiar with a sort of interdisciplinary team that's responsible for the design of the building, you'll have a specialist on lighting, mechanical, electrical, VT, AV, whatever it is. And we've sort of added the red one at the end, smart, which is, I'll add some tech stuff and hope for the best. And we never really work with each other. We've tried to sort of, I think, put a bit of a fix on it, and I believe it will be a temporary role. We've sort of said, oh, the MSI will, or the Master Systems Integrator will make sure that everybody talks with each other, and it's working as a role, but it doesn't seem a value for money way for people to work. And I kind of live with the aspiration that in sort of Ove Arup's Total Architecture, that if we start to study the fields of others, that we'll actually come up with a sort of beautiful integrated design that might work and should, I hope, feel a little bit more like that, but I live in hope. That didn't happen. So what I had learnt from this, I don't know if the batteries are running out, is that you have to start with a really strong brief. Saying that it's smart doesn't really help. You want to get down to the point where you've said it will do these things, it will work in this way, and it will do it because of this intended consequence or value to the business. You have to go above and beyond to teach when you take on a smart buildings role in order to help those that you have to work with understand what it is that you're trying to do and how it's different to what they've done before. And in certain cases, and I think probably my biggest lesson on this client, is to know when to call it quits. At a certain point, you can only bash your head on a brick wall for so long before you have to say, I don't think this is going to work, and we need to part ways. They get something different at the end, but sometimes I think it's the best thing to do. The next story is about retrofitting a building that hadn't yet finished construction, which seems absolutely nuts. And we had sort of two forces working against each other here. Construction is a slow thing. For the building that I'm talking about, it took 5 years to get the thing out the ground and finished, whereas technology, things move quite quickly, particularly as we've seen with ChatGPT over the past couple of months. And then the sort of force in the middle that brings them together is the market, which to me feels like it moves at more of a medium pace. And over that sort of timeline, expectations of what speculative space on the market had to offer shot up. There was so much competition. This was just before the pandemic, so the office was seen as the beacon of where everybody needed to be and to go, and investments were being made. But the design team had missed the fundamentals of how different parts of the building fabric move at different times. So if we take the sort of x-axis of time, you will have a structure in the building that you would hope would last more than 100 years, and you probably won't do too many changes to it. Your plant, you will change every 30 years as the stuff gets old and knackered and you need to swap it out. You might do a fit out every 10 years to bring it up to the kind of decoration standards that move with the times. You would then maybe refresh some of the actual technology and equipment that you've installed in the space, and then every year, 6 months, you might need to do a software or firmware update. And it basically means that different parts of the building move through time in different ways. So when you're designing something, you need to be super aware of the obsolescence that you will put into a specification. Don't rush into decisions, because it might be that although you've defined something now and they're going to give you a really good deal, that in fact, if you probably just waited until the end of the construction period, that deal would still be there, and at least you'd have the most modern piece of technology that's in there. And then when you're writing your specifications, never specify technologies or even performance, but what you need it to do. And then your spec will stand the test of time. The next one was actually really fun, and I learned a lot from it. I call it Smart School Graduates. And I was working with a client who was sort of working with, they called in a bunch of consultants to talk to them about smart buildings, because they'd heard it was important and they should probably do something about it. But they were very kind in saying, like, Matt, I know that you're not trying to be a sort of smarty pants here, but we just don't understand the words that you're using. And this is my Smart Building Conference bingo card, if you'd like to borrow that. And so what we actually did was put on for them, before we spoke to them any more about smart building type stuff, was to sort of level set with their kind of top 20 what it was all about. And from it, kind of learned that built environment education, it just doesn't cut the mustard anymore. And they had to learn so much of the fundamentals of, like, what's HTML, what is CSS, what does platform mean? Because they were bombarded with brilliant sales pitches that all looked really good. And it's like, well, how do I make a couple of million quid decision on a bunch of words that I don't understand? And so from that, this is the curriculum, I suppose, that I designed them, that I thought about in 3 tracks. Firstly, the context, so they could see how it was situated within their operational and business context, and sort of what that meant, looking at things to do around the business opportunity for using smart buildings, the fundamentals of the technology, what it meant for their facilities managers, the trends that are pushing tech, and how you build a business case. The digital track then taught them the fundamentals that they needed to know about techie stuff, if that's the Internet of Things, what is a systems architecture, in brackets, not a wiring diagram, which is very common that I see from engineers, how platforms work, what's web tech, what do you do with a mobile app, and how do you get one built. And then finally, in the last track, physical, which then helps them look at the changes that have happened to the base build systems, if that's energy analytics, the fancy stuff that lights can do, access control, location services, and how you prove things in the WELL standard using some IoT. And yeah, I think what I'd learned is that the continuous, like, professional development, I don't think I really appreciated it as part of my chartership, is actually a thing, and that there's definitely always something to learn. And with technology moving so quickly, we've got to keep on top of it. If you want to try and meet a standard in your building, and I think there's lots of badges out there, it's difficult to really be critical on what you're going for, again, if you don't understand it. And as much as you possibly can, read, speak, ask. The fact that you're here at the conference today is a good sign. The next one I'm calling Double for Half. And we had a building where we wanted to use some modern kind of networking standards. And what normally happens is you put in 2 types of network. The first one is your IT network, which is where the business will run all of the stuff to do with what they do. And then you put in an operational technology network, because the sort of fear is that due to security, I don't want the BMS and other things going through my network. And what we're sort of seeing now that software-defined networks have become more of a thing, that you can kind of converge them and you use, it kind of reminds me, I think about like the software and the switches of, remember the ADSL plug-in filters that you used to get from broadband? It kind of feels like that. And the rules that it has, I'm really struggling with the clicker, it sort of defines what machine's allowed to talk where, what protocol, how you onboard things, if there's some kind of MUD file, so that if you get to a point whereby your aircon is betting on the horses, you know that you have some sort of security problem. But the building in particular that I'm thinking of, we're already in contract with the contractor, and we said, okay, well, we only want you to put in half the wires. And the sort of change order for that was probably about 2 million euros, which was nuts. It's like, hang on, how are you charging us more for half of the stuff? And it basically came down to, I think, a bit of fear, a bit of not knowing, they've never seen that before, and all of the kind of risk for them that was baked into it. So rather disappointingly, we had to say, now you're all right, we just won't use it. And we had to come back to it at practical completion. Nuts. So I'd say that what I learned from that is some people simply will not believe a business case. You have to spend the time to explain and explain again. And I've found that security is often used as a means to end conversations rather than looking for ways in which you can make it work. And given all of the new sort of standards, rules, the leaps and bounds in cybersecurity, it doesn't feel like a good enough excuse to me anymore. And then the last story is sort of called a mobile app that's a bit too open source. So European project whereby the mobile app vendor was going to help their customer connect to HVAC, so you could almost have like a democratic thermostat sort of voting doobry what's it. It could connect to the lights for your individual personalized controls, and that you'd be able to get into meeting rooms, access doors, all with this one thing. And what we found is once it had gone online and there were lots of users, that it simply overwhelmed all of the systems that it was talking to because of the way that it was interfaced directly on the controller. So you essentially had hundreds of people giving different commands at different times across these different systems, and it's not used to that kind of activity on an OT network. And what I think they probably should have done is install some kind of mediation software in the middle, which for the purposes of this we'll call a platform, so that it could be a bit sensible and think about the deadbands and if it's probably moved something a bit too much, just to be the calming influence to all of the things that were happening across the app. In fact, one thing I think was probably the most squiffy was that when you went to the barriers, it knew you were at the barriers, but it was a lottery as to which one opened for you, which was a very odd user experience. So what I learned from that is that secure design is an absolute business imperative. You should take vendor claims with a pinch of salt, and often you get what you pay for, and I think we just need to be reminded of that sometimes. So in summary, my 5 lessons from all of this are fads probably are just that. If you stick to the fundamentals of why the business case behind it and the good principles of technology, you'll be absolutely fine. You should worry about obsolescence and design for the long term. That with all of this going on, people get quite angry, particularly if it's something that they don't understand. So I ask that we all be kind to each other. With all of the claims that we see in marketing brochures, honesty and integrity have value. And finally, we should be a bit more like Bill Gates and keep learning. If you thought any of this was interesting, I've uploaded a bunch onto YouTube if you'd like to have a watch. Otherwise, thank you very much. Cheers.